Something very interesting is unfolding around the Philadelphia Eagles as the first days of NFL free agency move forward. And if you are an Eagles fan watching all the moves across the league, it might feel a little strange to see so many teams spending massive amounts of money while Philadelphia remains completely quiet. But when you look closer at how this organization operates, the situation actually follows a very familiar pattern that Eagles fans have seen before under general manager Howie Roseman. In fact, the start of this year's free agency looks extremely similar to what happened last season. Many fans get emotionally attached to players who help the team compete for championships, and when those players leave in free agency, it can create panic across social media. But the reality is that this is the business side of the National Football League, and Philadelphia has already watched several important contributors walk away after receiving massive contracts elsewhere. Just yesterday, 4 starters from the Eagles roster ended up signing deals worth a combined $116 million in guaranteed money. Those numbers are enormous, and in several cases they were simply far beyond what Philadelphia was willing to pay. One of the clearest examples is Jalen Phillips, who signed a 4-year contract worth $120 million with the Carolina Panthers. That deal includes $80 million guaranteed and pays him $30 million per season. Philadelphia had real interest in keeping Phillips. Internally, bringing him back was part of the offseason plan, and the team reportedly hoped to retain him for something close to $20 million per year. But once Carolina pushed the price all the way to $30 million annually, the Eagles decided to step away, and when you consider Phillips's medical history, that decision becomes easier to understand. He previously medically retired in college because of a neck injury and has also suffered both an ACL tear and an Achilles injury during his NFL career. At that price point, Philadelphia was comfortable letting another team take the risk. This is exactly the type of situation where Howie Roseman historically lets other teams reset the market. Instead of jumping into bidding wars early in free agency, he allows organizations with more cap pressure or roster needs to spend aggressively. Once those big contracts establish the market value for positions, the Eagles typically come in later and sign players to more controlled deals that end up looking like bargains. And there is another major factor behind the Eagles' patience this year. The team already has a massive financial commitment on the offensive side of the ball. In 2025, Philadelphia spent more cash on offense than any other team in the NFL. That level of investment also raised expectations, especially considering the offensive struggles the team experienced last season under Kevin Patullo. The organization clearly expects better results moving forward, and that is part of the reason why the coaching structure and offensive approach are being reevaluated. Defensively, however, the Eagles have quietly built one of the most impressive units in football. Over the past 2 seasons, Philadelphia has ranked as the number 2 total defense in the NFL when combining those years. Even more impressive is the fact that the group was also one of the youngest and cheapest defensive units in the league last season, but that financial advantage is about to disappear because several cornerstone defenders will soon be due for major contract extensions. Players like Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, and especially Jalen Carter are all approaching the point where the organization will need to invest significant money to keep them long term. Jordan Davis already became the first major domino to fall. He recently signed a contract extension that pays him $26 million per year, which shows exactly where the Eagles' financial priorities are heading. Philadelphia wants to retain the young core players that it drafted and developed, and that means carefully managing cap space today so those deals can happen tomorrow. Because of that strategy, the Eagles appear prepared to rebuild portions of the offense through the draft, rather than expensive free agent contracts. Over the next few seasons, we could be watching the beginning of a new era of offensive skill players in Philadelphia, developed internally instead of acquired through major free agency splashes. Of course, several departures have also created noticeable holes on the roster. For example, Jahan Dotson signed a 2-year contract with the Atlanta Falcons worth $15 million, including $10 million guaranteed. While that may not seem like a massive deal compared to other contracts across the league, it was still more than Philadelphia was willing to pay for a player whose role in the offense was relatively limited. Another interesting departure involves safety Reed Blankenship. He signed with the Houston Texans for $8.25 million per year. For a player who entered the league as an undrafted free agent and made less than $6 million during his entire time with Philadelphia, that represents a huge jump in salary. Even though the Eagles technically could have matched that number, it was a significant increase compared to what they had been paying him previously. Meanwhile, linebacker Nakobe Dean also found a new home after signing a 3-year contract worth $36 million. Dean was an important emotional leader for the Eagles' defense and a tone setter when he was healthy, but injuries followed him throughout his career. Every season he dealt with some kind of physical setback, and the Eagles appear confident that younger players already on the roster can fill that role moving forward. All of these moves explain why the Eagles front office is staying patient right now while other franchises spend aggressively. The organization is prioritizing long-term roster stability over short-term headlines, and that philosophy becomes even more important when you consider the situation surrounding one of the most important defensive players on the roster. Over the last 24 hours, rumors began circulating across the league about potential trade discussions involving Jalen Carter. That immediately raised concerns among fans because Carter has already proven himself to be one of the most dominant young defensive linemen in football. However, reports from inside Philadelphia suggest the situation is actually the complete opposite of what those rumors implied. Instead of shopping Carter in trade discussions, the Eagles are reportedly working on a long-term contract extension that could lock him into the organization for years to come. If that deal is finalized soon, it would confirm that Carter remains a central piece of the franchise's future. And when you look at his age, his talent, and his production, it would be extremely rare for a team to move on from a player like that unless there were serious concerns about injuries or character. None of that appears to be the case here, which is why many insiders believe an extension announcement could happen very soon. So while the rest of the NFL is making headlines with massive spending during the opening days of free agency, the Philadelphia Eagles seem to be following a much more calculated strategy that focuses on protecting the long-term future of the roster. But that leads to a very important question for Eagles fans right now. If Philadelphia continues letting expensive veterans walk while focusing on extensions for its young defensive stars, do you think this strategy will keep the Eagles in Super Bowl contention? Or should the team be more aggressive in free agency this year? Another situation that continues to develop behind the scenes involves tight end Dallas Goedert, and the longer free agency moves forward, the more it looks like the Eagles could actually end up bringing him back. At the beginning of the offseason, there was real uncertainty surrounding his future in Philadelphia. Several teams across the league were looking for upgrades at the tight end position, and it appeared possible that Goedert could receive a contract offer large enough to pull him away from the Eagles. But something interesting has happened as the market has unfolded. While certain positions have exploded financially with massive contracts, the tight end market has not reached the same level. Without a major bidding war developing around him, the Eagles may now have a real opportunity to retain Goedert at a price that makes sense for both sides. From the team's perspective, the ideal scenario would likely be a contract in the range of $8 to $10 million per year for a player who has consistently produced at a high level since entering the league in 2018. That could turn into a very smart value deal. At the same time, the Eagles are clearly preparing for the future at that position. The team understands that the best organizations in the league never rely on just one player at a key spot. Instead, they develop depth and competition through the draft. That is why Philadelphia is already exploring potential tight end prospects who could join the roster and eventually grow into a bigger role. The idea would be to pair a young developing tight end with Goedert, creating a stronger 1-2 combination than what the team has had in recent seasons. While that situation continues to evolve, another interesting development involves the Eagles' preparation for the upcoming draft. Reports indicate that wide receiver Omar Cooper Jr. is scheduled for a top 30 visit with Philadelphia. For fans who follow the draft closely, this type of visit often signals real interest from the organization. Cooper has generated a lot of attention because of his unique playing style. Some evaluators have compared certain aspects of his game to Deebo Samuel during his prime years. Samuel became one of the most dangerous yards after catch weapons in the NFL thanks to his ability to operate both as a receiver and as a running threat. Offensive coordinators could move him all over the formation, using screens, crossers, and creative route concepts to put the ball in his hands and let him create explosive plays. The comparison does not mean Cooper is identical to Samuel, but there are similarities in terms of physicality and playmaking ability. Some scouts even believe Cooper may have more natural hands and cleaner route running technique coming out of college. One of the most impressive moments of his college career came in a dramatic game against Penn State, where he climbed above the defender, secured the catch in traffic, and kept both feet in bounds to complete a game-winning play. It was the type of moment that shows shows the confidence and competitive mentality teams look for in future NFL playmakers. And this is where things start to get even more intriguing for Eagles fans, because the interest in Cooper naturally raises questions about the long-term future of star receiver A.J. Brown. Brown has been one of the most productive wide receivers in football since arriving in Philadelphia, earning multiple All-Pro selections during his time with the team. Moving on from a player of that caliber would be a massive decision. However, reports around the league suggest that several teams have explored the possibility of trading for him. According to league insiders, Brown's preferred destinations would include the New England Patriots, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Buffalo Bills. Each of those teams could theoretically use a top-tier wide receiver to elevate their passing attack. But the situation is complicated for several reasons. One factor is the financial impact of trading Brown. Because of the way his contract is structured, moving him would create a significant dead cap charge for Philadelphia, which makes a deal difficult to execute immediately. Another factor is leverage. On one hand, the Eagles hold leverage because elite receivers rarely become available on the trade market. On the other hand, if only a small number of teams are truly interested, those teams could try to pressure Philadelphia into lowering the asking price. Meanwhile, the market has already shifted in other ways. The Buffalo Bills made a major move by trading for DJ Moore, which potentially removes them from the pursuit of Brown. And perhaps the most interesting development involves the Patriots, who recently signed wide receiver Romeo Doubs to a 4-year contract worth $68 million. That signing immediately raised questions across the league. Does bringing in Doubs signal that New England is stepping away from the idea of trading for Brown, or does it simply give them another weapon while they continue evaluating the situation? According to reports, the Patriots releasing Stefon Diggs earlier in the offseason left them searching for new options at the position. Doubs, who is only 25 years old, offers upside as a developing receiver with strong route-running ability and playmaking potential down the field. There are still some concerns surrounding him, particularly related to past concussion issues, but overall the deal could turn out to be strong value for New England depending on the final annual salary numbers. And importantly, insiders have suggested that the signing of Doubs does not completely eliminate the possibility of the Patriots still exploring a trade for Brown if the opportunity becomes realistic. So as free agency continues to unfold, the Eagles are navigating several complex situations at once. They are allowing expensive veterans to leave, protecting cap space for their young defensive core, evaluating draft prospects who could reshape the offense, and potentially dealing with one of the biggest trade storylines of the entire offseason. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that the next few weeks could shape the direction of this franchise for years to come. Now, I want to hear directly from the fans watching this. If the Eagles had to choose between keeping A.J. Brown long-term or preparing for the future by drafting a receiver like Omar Cooper Jr., on which direction would you want the team to take? Another layer of this situation that Eagles fans should pay attention to is the broader strategy that general manager Howie Roseman has followed for years when building the roster in Philadelphia. What we are seeing right now is not inactivity, it is calculated patience. And historically, that patience has often turned into some of the smartest roster moves in the entire NFL. When you look across the league during the first wave of free agency,